Okay, episode 3, Silas. This is Harmonizing 1 Thessalonians 3, Athens, with Acts chapter 20, Greece. The problem is that in Acts 17, it indicates that Paul was alone at Athens. However, 1 Thessalonians 3, 1-2 says the following: Therefore, when we could bear it no longer, we were willing to be left behind at Athens alone, and we sent Timothy, our brother, and God's co-worker in the gospel of Christ, to establish and exhort you in your faith. So you can see the problem there. If Paul is alone at Athens, who is this we that we're talking about? And if Timothy was sent out, that sounds like he would have had to have been in Athens in the first place. So a closer look at the timeline. Acts 17 says that Silas and Timothy remained there, and that means Berea. And then Paul goes on to Athens, and then he calls for Silas and Timothy to come to him at Athens as soon as possible. However, in Acts, we'll see that they were not able to join Paul until after he had already arrived in Corinth, and that's in chapter 18. So we can observe here, Silas and Timothy were never in Athens with Paul in the Acts 17 narrative. They're in Berea, and the next time we see them, they're in Corinth. What's their delay? We do not know. Could it possibly, was Timothy in prison? Might this work into the closing argument of the book of Hebrews there? I don't know, that's for later. But the bottom line is attempts to harmonize 1 Thessalonians 3 with Acts chapter 17 are not convincing. I'll put a link in there just to maybe some commentaries there. They all get confusing and they start saying some weird things. Is there a better way to harmonize this? So here's a question. What's the capital of Greece? The answer is Athens. So as we looked in that 1 Thessalonians chapter and in Acts 17, it talks about Athens. But something I learned today might have been new to you as well. Paul also went to Greece on the next missionary journey. He had his third missionary journey in Acts chapter 20. We'll read verse 2-3. And then it says, when he, Paul, had gone through those regions, that's speaking of Macedonia. Again, this is third missionary journey, probably at least a couple of years after we left Silas and Timothy there in Macedonia. And so when he had gone through those regions and had given them much encouragement, he came to Greece. Again, what's the capital of Greece? Athens. There he spent 3 months, and when a plot was made against him by the Jews as he was about to set sail for Syria, he decided to return through Macedonia. Okay, so a closer look at Acts chapter 20. Again, Paul's third missionary journey, and then the we statements reappear. I'm not going to read verse 2 and 3, we just read that, but in verse 4, it says, so Peter the Berean, the son of Pyrrhus, accompanied him, and of the Thessalonians, Aristarchus and Secundus and Gaius of Derbe and Timothy, that's very important, and the Asians, Tychicus and Trophimus. These went on ahead and were waiting for us. There again, there's a reintroduction of the us or the we statements. They waited for us at Troas, but we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and in 5 days we came to them at Troas, where we stayed for 7 days. So very important. We have Timothy here again. We have the we statements re-involved. This we can tie in with the introduction to the Thessalonian letters, Paul, Silvanus, and Timothy writing to the church of the Thessalonians. And we can tie this in with chapter 3 of 1 Thessalonians, when Timothy was sent to go back to them so that Paul could just see how they were doing. So a couple of questions here. What does this have to do with Silas? And why have most commentaries missed what we just looked at with Acts chapter 20? First of all, the commentaries assume that Paul never returned to Athens or Greece. And I guess I'm guilty of that too. You never think about that Paul was actually in Athens twice. Therefore, the First Thessalonian reference to Athens in someone's mind like that can only be reference to the Acts 17 episode. Next bullet point, they assume that the last mention of Silas in Acts chapter 18 at Corinth is the end of Silas's appearances in the book of Acts. But again, we've already looked at this. We've proven that the we statements are Silas. So the commentaries, they don't see that Silas is behind the we statements. This is where word searches get they're good, but you can miss out. If I had typed in Athens, I would never caught that Paul went to Greece. That probably went back to Athens again in chapter 20. And if you just type in Silas, you're going to see that his name stops in the book of Acts at chapter 18, verses 5. But instead, we know that he's behind these we statements. And just a random comment question here. Where has Luke been in all of this? Nowhere. Our first 3 studies, his name's not in the book of Acts. His name is not in the letter to the Thessalonians. So I've got the same future episodes, Lord willing, here, questions here with a new question though. But first of all, are Silas and Luke the same person? I think the only way that Luke wrote the third gospel and the book of Acts is if he is Silas. Again, I'm not decided on that. We'll look at that. How does Peter mentioning Silvanus at the end of First Peter fit into this? Did Silas pen, or did he write the book of Hebrews? There's another question, or just a thought that came up here as I'm reading these commentaries on First Thessalonians. There are some who think that First Thessalonians was actually written after Second Thessalonians. I can see how they get there. I haven't looked too much in detail, but this might add to that, because this first tells us the First Thessalonians would have had to have been written on or after Paul's third missionary journey, and not immediately after the episodes in Acts 17. It has to be written after the episodes of Acts 20. So again, we're just building up, looks like a bit bigger case, more evidence of what we've seen in the first two. And now this episode, it just seems that Silas wrote the book of Acts. I'm convinced of it. If you are or not, let me know. Your comments and questions are always welcome. And we're just going to continue in the study, see where it leads. And until next time, as always, contend earnestly for the faith, which was once for all delivered to the saints. And God bless.